to get a better sense of the challenges and opportunities these cities will face, we've invited mayors from some of the winning cities to lead us in a conversation about resilience. I'd like to turn the platform now over to the moderator from the Financial Times, journalist Ed Crooks. Thank you all again for being here.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Julia. Thanks very much for that introduction. As she was saying, it's very exciting to be able to have some of the mayors from some of the winning cities here to be discussing some of these issues. We're going to have a kind of an open panel discussion and hopefully give a chance for all of you to ask questions as well a little bit later on. But first of all, we're just going to spend a bit of time talking to each of the mayors individually. And perhaps if I can welcome to the stage now, first of all, Quan, who's the mayor of the City of Oakland. Thank you very much indeed. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming, and congratulations. I thought it might be helpful, perhaps a little bit, just to start by defining terms to an extent. What do you mean by resilience, and how do you understand the word?
You know, I started my political career as a school board member, and to me, I looked at the ability of some children to face really tough situations, living in poverty, violence in their neighborhoods, and still have that hope and that dream. And so for me, resilience is the ability to get knocked down. If you're an urban mayor, you're used to that, and get up and not only fight, but to do better than before.
And in terms of the particular challenges you face in Oakland, what are the things you feel, or what are the other things that you actually do need to be resilient to? And obviously one thing's about seismic events, but presumably there's much more to it than that.
Well, it's interesting that on this panel we're going to have New Orleans. So New Orleans and Oakland are actually pretty similar. Major American cities are slower sometimes coming out of the recession. We have people who are further in poverty with less skills to begin with. So that overall needing to help build the new economies. New Orleans and Oakland are both port cities. We're actually pretty important to the whole region. Oakland was the first port to export more than imports. But the critical two things that we looked at when we applied for this is one that, like New Orleans, we have a disaster that we're expecting, a major earthquake on the Hayward Fault. About a third of our low-income housing is vulnerable. If we were to have a major earthquake today, we could lose about 26,000 housing units and maybe up to 15,000 lives, depending on when the earthquake is. And so I've been leading an initiative throughout my career, first to retrofit the schools and the hospitals, and now we're trying to go for what we call soft story buildings. The second, I think, major thing that we're looking at is Oakland, despite what we're known for nationally, which includes crime and historic disasters. I'm literally the granddaughter, great-granddaughter of someone who came from San Francisco after the San Francisco earthquake, so that rebuilt Oakland. We're also just looking at the new green economy. Oakland's consistently one of the greenest cities. We were one of the first to ban styrofoam and plastic bags and to go to composting all of our waste. We have both a zero waste plan as well as one of the most ambitious climate action plans in the country.
Thank you. And so, how does that kind of environmental agenda intersect with the resilience program then?
You know, I think that poor people are the most exposed to the dangers of environmental pollution. So you'll see that in Oakland. In the headlines recently, we've been having fights with truckers who have not yet retrofit their trucks, and we're up to 90% of retrofitting our trucks. Why? Because in West Oakland, next to the port, we have the highest rates of emphysema among seniors and asthma for children. And so there's an issue of environmental justice. And so those who live in poorer neighborhoods usually live in more polluted neighborhoods. But what we've learned with global warming and with environmental pollution is that the rich and the poor side by side equally suffer, and so that even can equally suffer, so that we need, by taking care of those who are most in need, we actually take care of everybody.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we're going to get a chance to discuss all these issues at greater length in a moment, but if you'd just like to take a seat now. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage the second mayor on our panel, Mr. Sall, Khalifa Sall, who's the mayor of the City of Dakar. I have to confess, I'm afraid I stopped learning French 30 years ago, so I'm a little rusty. So I'm going to take the simultaneous translation option. So thank you for that. So if you just bear with me just for a moment. But thank you very much indeed for coming to the stage. Bonjour. And let me just get this. Try and get this to work. Just hold on a moment. Right, there we go. Let's, I trust that'll work. So, well, as I say, thank you very much indeed for coming. Perhaps could you tell us a little bit about kind of your involvement in this and your kind of why you've become engaged with the resilience agenda and this program?
Je voudrais d'abord dire bonjour à tout le monde et leur apporter la chaleur de mon pays et de ma ville au moment où vous avez froid. Vous dire aussi que la résilience est perçue comme nous, pour nous et par nous, comme un hymne à la responsabilité. Il s'agit pour des femmes et des hommes de se donner les moyens d'affronter les aléas.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, it doesn't like the not working with the microphone.
Let me do that. Donc, il s'agit pour ces hommes et des femmes de se donner les moyens d'affronter les aléas.
Men and women, the means to assume their future. We're from Dakar. This is the nearest point to America and to Europe in Africa, actually.
C'est une ville de 87 km² qui a 3 millions d'habitants.
We have 3 million inhabitants and the city is 87,000 square kilometers. It's a near island built on an old volcano, and there are also many droughts in the regions. So resilience for us is an everyday struggle, so that we can live in this beautiful environment, even though this environment is sometimes difficult to deal with. And we're delighted to be here, and this meeting for us is a sharing of experiences. What the Rockefeller Foundation managed to do is to allow various cities from the world to share their experiences and match them. A city like Dakar, which is not very big and which is on the shore, in a country that is not very wealthy, is dealing with many ecological issues. We have erosion of the shoreline. We have shortages of water. But mostly our main issue is how to settle rural populations that are moving to urban areas due to the droughts. And therefore you can imagine all the related issues that we have to deal with in terms of building housing and taking care of those populations as they settle in urban areas. Resilience for us, therefore, is not just resistance, it's not just dealing with the issue at hand, but it is also, very importantly, how we prepare, how we anticipate future issues, future challenges.
Thank you. And in terms of, just to give a quick idea of some of the things you're doing in terms of what you're trying to achieve in Dakar to improve resilience. Perhaps you could just give us a couple of examples just to give a sense of what you're doing.
The first priority is to handle the population issue. We must make sure our human resources are able to handle the various issues they will have to deal with and to understand them as well. Our second priority is to take care of urban planning. We don't have that much land, and we have a lot of people. Therefore, we are constantly facing new issues of housing and settlements. And therefore, in this area, we've launched a number of initiatives, the main one being the École project, the school project, because the main asset we have in our country is our population. The second thing is urban planning. The city is not very big, and it is very populated. Therefore, we work on housing issues. We have to build new infrastructures. And therefore, we've launched a 20-year plan to handle all those issues in our urban area in Dakar. We also have an issue, an environmental issue, which is the erosion of the shoreline. And it is a major issue because every 10 years we lose 4 meters of shoreline. And therefore we have a real dilemma here. Should we take over and build on the sea, or should we go back and take more land in the back of the city? And we've had major water shortage issues because of the lakes and the adduction issues that are related. We had a problem of shortage of water for about a week. And because we are in a dry area, we have to import actually our water from about 200 miles away from the city. And as you see, some countries are fighting for a better quality of life, but we're still fighting for our survival and for solving all those fundamental issues that a big city like us is facing.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll be able to get into those, all of those issues in more detail, I hope, very soon. But thank you very much. Would you like to take a seat? Now my pleasure to welcome to the stage Mitch Landrieu, the Mayor of New Orleans. Good morning. Thanks very much indeed for coming along.
Morning.
I guess same question for you, really. Resilience, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to the city of New Orleans?
Resilience means how to be strong and how to be prepared to receive whatever's coming your way and to be able to respond to it in a way that allows you to live in a way that you have lived or a way that you want to live in the future. And one of the things that we have found out, and I feel like New Orleans is what we call the canary in the coal mine. Now, when I said this to my 24-year-old daughter, she didn't know what a canary in a coal mine was. And I know most of the people in this room are younger than me, so we're the test case because it feels like even post-September 11th, people thought that was somewhat of a unique event because it was it was in and of itself a major catastrophe that stunned the nation. And the response to that was something that we waited for a couple of years. But the biggest natural disaster that hit us in the 21st century was Katrina. But in New Orleans, we had Katrina, we had Rita, which was a storm that came 3 weeks after that hit the other side of the state. We had Ike, we had Gustav, we had the national recession, and then we had the BP oil spill. And all of those events, some man-made, some naturally driven, some as a result of economic imperatives, put a huge amount of stress on the people in New Orleans. And Katrina, it hurt 500,000 homes. It actually destroyed 250,000. And the dramatic damage that it did was the result of it destroying everything at once. So in some communities, you'll have things that hurt a small sector of it, and the rest of the community can help come in and help save the day. But when everything gets hurt at once, we were in the position of having to build back from scratch, and not everybody had enough resources to help anybody else. And so resilience was, in its most personal form, something that people will find inside of themselves. A courage to stand up, the willingness and the strength to keep going, the fortitude to know that a better day is coming. That is personal resilience. But structural resilience is creating the conditions that will either live with what's coming with it or keep outside of it what you don't want inside. And one of the things that's begun to happen is that we've become much more aware, which is why we're here today, to think about that all cities in the world need to think about how to build themselves stronger, both personally and physically. And the reason I'm so excited about this, Judith, thank you, is because what we know from this operation that we're all involved in today is that, number one, we're all in this together. We all have very similar situations that are occurring all over the world, that we can learn from each other and that we can communicate and we can share experiences. Judith, in her opening, talked about the Netherlands. So back in 1954, the Netherlands got hurt really, really badly. But they did something very smart. They didn't ignore it. They didn't say that this was a one-off. They said this is the way the world is going to be, and we have to learn how to live with water rather than try to push water out. So if you think about just that essential concept, that's transformative in the way that the Netherlands has now developed since 1954. And I think as we begin to think about having to be strong, as Judith said, there are probably 1,000 ideas in this room about how we're going to get ourselves from where we are to the place where we want to be. So I'm thrilled to be here. I think there's a lot to be learned because the system is being stressed, and where you see the problem is where our weak points are. And the weak points are the things that we have to fix, and fixing those things will make us stronger and, in the term that we're using, more resilient.
Thank you for that. You just mentioned sort of parallels and kind of similar issues emerging in very different parts of the world. And just hearing Mayor Sall talk about Dakar, talking about coastal erosion, which of course is a huge issue in Louisiana, also talking about the water shortages and the drought issue that they've got there, which is obviously an issue in many parts of the US. One phenomenon clearly that people are linking this to is climate change. There's certainly been some change already. There may well be much greater changes to come. Is that something you're thinking about much in your planning? Do you kind of factor that in when you're kind of thinking about resilience?
The answer is yes, but this, you don't, in my opinion, I don't want this to turn into a debate about climate change. The climate is changing. That is a fact. That is one of the things that is going to cause you to receive something that you can't control. Higher water, more storms, whatever that might be. But resilience also is something that you have to have in order to beat back man-made problems. You can just tell from the things that we're talking about now. It could be a hurricane, it could be an earthquake, it could be a fire, it could be a terrorist attack. The resilience thing is much, much broader than just responding to what the changes in the atmosphere are going to bring us, although that is going to be a major impetus. And so irrespective of what it is that we're trying to protect ourselves from, you have to be strong and be able to respond. One of the things that we learned in emergency response in Louisiana, and we think we got pretty good at this because of a lot of unfortunate circumstances, is that the thing that came last time is not the thing that's coming this time. So whether it's Sandy or whether it's Katrina, whether it's a 1 in terms of wind or whether it's higher than that because of storm surge, whether it's an electrical outage event. So remember, Katrina for New Orleans was a water event. The levees broke. Water came in. Katrina had come through New Orleans and went out, just like almost every other major storm, and we were fine until about 1 o'clock the next day when the federal levees broke. And then we filled up with water. that turned into a water event. And so as the city prepared itself for the next thing, we started thinking about what are we going to do when water comes. Well, what happened next time was the electric grid went out. And for those of you that were here for Sandy, you know what it's like. After 72 hours of having no electricity, people get a little impatient. And then that gets a little bit hard, especially if you can't really kind of force feed your BlackBerries with the kind of things that you need, or your iPhones to communicate with people. And so an electric grid event, and Judith, y'all wrote a little bit about this, is how vulnerable is the nation if in fact the way that you transmit electricity to one place or another just has, you know, one way to go. Much like water. If you've only got one pipeline coming into a city with a lot of people, and that one pipeline gets disrupted, you have a huge problem. And so what I said before was just in the macro way, you have to stress the system or know what the system looks like when it's stressed to find out where your weak points are so that you have what we call redundancies. You have a whole bunch of different ways to get, let's just use power, for example. And in Sandy, for example, you had one of the same exact problems years later that we had when Rita hit in 2005, which was we had to evacuate nursing homes and hospitals that failed to have generators in their buildings. And so when they had patients that were really in their most vulnerable states, tracheotomy patients, et cetera, they had no way to take care of those individuals, and they didn't have a good evacuation plan. Had they had redundant electrical capabilities by having generators or things, you would have been able to basically sustain those patients in place. And of course, 5 years later, New York repeated the same exact problem that we saw in New Orleans some time ago, which gets us to the issue and why this particular initiative is so wonderful. Something that will happen in New Orleans will actually happen in Medellin, or will happen in Senegal, or will happen across the world. And that's why learning from each other is critically important, sharing experiences, and then figuring out the very specific, not what we have to do, but how specifically to do it, I think is going to be the most instructive piece of this initiative that we're working on together.
Thank you very much indeed. Would you like to take a seat?
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Mayor Landrieu. It's now my pleasure to welcome the last city representative to the stage, Claudia Restrepo, who's the Vice Mayor of the City of Medellin. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Same question for you, really. Resilience, what does it mean?
I prefer to speak in Spanish, if you don't
absolutely.
mind.
No, not at all. No,
I understood.
And I gave up Spanish even longer ago than I gave up French. So, again, I don't know if we have a translation
No,
option.
don't worry, I can understand.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, perfect.
fantastic.
It's just because I feel confident.
Absolutely.
in
Yeah,
speak.
certainly. Please go ahead. So, so I was saying, my question, sorry, a long way back, the question was, resilience, what does it mean to you and to the city of Medellin?
Okay. Bueno, para nosotros, resiliencia es aprendizaje. En el caso de Medellín, nosotros estamos hablando de un aprendizaje que hemos hecho después de 60 años de historia de violencia, una violencia que sigue mutando en nuestra ciudad, en nuestro país, que hoy se transforma de una manera que nos obliga a pensar en otros modos para atender esa situación. Y ese aprendizaje para nosotros significa dos cosas, educación y cultura. Cuando esta oportunidad se nos presenta como una red de ciudades resilientes, el gran punto para nosotros como ciudad es poder seguir aprendiendo, a ser resistentes, que eso es realmente lo que hemos sido. Resistir las diferentes formas de violencia que se han presentado en el país, en la ciudad, resistir anteponiendo a eso la educación y la cultura. Y por eso creo que para nosotros lo más simple o la palabra más sencilla para explicar lo que es resiliencia es aprendizaje. Más que resistencia, es aprendizaje. Y nosotros tenemos que aprender a seguir aprendiendo porque eso no es una competencia tan sencilla. O sea, a veces parece simple, pero no es tan fácil mantener esa competencia de estar aprendiendo permanentemente. Y yo creo que eso es lo que hacemos en Medellín, tratar de entender nuestras problemáticas y a partir de ella empezar a transformar y a encontrar soluciones. Concretamente, en nuestro caso, han sido soluciones basadas en la transformación cultural, social y urbana de la ciudad, que ha sido una posibilidad de crear una estética y que esa estética genere resistencia. pero una resistencia ética a una, digamos, a una historia de violencia del país y de la ciudad.
Okay. Thank you. Apologies for the delay. In terms of, I mean, you talk about learning about kind of, and the culture, and then the cultural kind of sense of resilience. How does that affect kind of the way the city is run and the kind of the decisions that you make as the city administration, the kind of things that you do?
Bueno, en el caso nuestro, yo creo que es fácil medir la transformación de nuestra ciudad en algo que realmente es lo que más popular nos ha hecho, lamentablemente, y es la tasa de homicidios que tenemos en el país o que hemos tenido en el país y en la ciudad. Es el imaginario de ciudad que hemos tenido. En los últimos 10 años, nuestra ciudad ha hecho una gran transformación en la disminución de sus tasas de homicidio. Ha hecho una gran transformación en su manera, en el imaginario de ciudad que tenemos, inclusive para nosotros como habitantes de la ciudad de Medellín. Esa transformación ha significado vernos desde otro lugar y poder seguir, digamos, aprendiendo. Hoy tenemos un gran reto, que yo creo que es uno de los mayores, digamos, los mayores retos que tenemos al participar o al aprender o al hacer parte de esta red, y es poder aprender un poco más a entender cómo la violencia está mutando en nuestra ciudad. La violencia tiene una particularidad, y es que cuando tú la aprendes a abordar desde una manera, hace unos 10 años la ciudad era una ciudad de carteles de droga, grandes carteles de droga. Hoy ya ellos no existen, sino que existen los pequeños mercados urbanos de droga, y eso ha transformado la condición, la manera como los usos y las formas de violencia de la ciudad. Y también tiene que cambiar los usos y las maneras como nosotros atendemos esa situación. Entonces, con 3 cosas muy importantes: uno, una apuesta muy grande en el tema de la equidad, en el tema de la inclusión social en muchas de nuestras comunas dentro de la ciudad. Una apuesta muy importante sobre la cultura y el valor de la vida y su dignificación, porque tantos años de violencia suelen instalarse en la entraña de la ciudad, y parte de lo que queremos hacer es desentrañar esa condición violenta y que eso transmute a unas nuevas maneras, a algo que nosotros hoy queremos, digamos, enfatizar mucho. Hemos luchado fuertemente por la violencia en nuestro país y en nuestra ciudad con la autoridad. Es muy importante que la mutemos hacia la resistencia civil, y eso es la gran apuesta que estamos haciendo, es decir, la resistencia social, que de alguna manera es la que efectivamente nos va a hacer volver a, digamos, continuar con ese proceso de transformación que hoy hace que Medellín sea reconocida como una ciudad con grandes innovaciones sociales, porque básicamente nuestras innovaciones son innovaciones sociales, urbanas y políticas, porque llevamos 3 periodos de gobiernos que le apuestan fuertemente a la educación, a la cultura, y que han puesto el tema de las agendas y la transparencia como un tema central. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much. If you'd also like to take a seat. So we're now going to get a chance.
Yay, thank you.
So we're now going to get a chance to discuss these issues among all of us, and hopefully, as I say, have some good questions from the floor. I'd like to also welcome to the stage, if I can, Michael Berkowitz, who's the Managing Director of the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities Programme. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming on. Do you want to sit down the far end? Yeah, why not? Yeah. Thanks a lot. I wondered if I could perhaps first of all pick up on something just that Claudia Restrepo was just saying, talking about kind of resilience as a sort of an attitude, as a cultural thing, as a social kind of sense. And I was wondering, I mean, perhaps I don't know who would like to, and perhaps Quan, if I could bring you on this, but if you start thinking about resilience and thinking in terms of resilience, as I say. It's now become a very popular word. It's a widely used word. I was wondering, in terms of the kind of the concept and the way you think about the concept, what difference does it make to your approach? And when you as a mayor, when you're kind of running your city and making decisions about the city, how does having a sense of and a concern for resilience affect what you do? I mean, do you want to start off? Or?
I guess so. You know, I've been thinking about the overall role that cities have been playing in the world. The president of the Rockefeller Foundation wrote the foreword to a book that I'm reading now. It's clear that everything is now happening on the local level, and that mayors at the local level often have to invent government and reinvent their cities constantly to deal with the worldwide recession. And to me, this is an opportunity to focus a lot of different initiatives my city has. But Oakland has been, you know, recovered from the, grew because of the San Francisco earthquake, and recent times had a urban wildfire that destroyed thousands of homes. And then we had a little earthquake, Loma Prieta, about 15 years ago that also destroyed about 5,000 homes. And so we've had to rebuild many times, and then 3 of these cities have a lot of urban violence on top of it. And so the question is, how do you bring it together in a way that helps your city be stronger? So one of the things, and that's unique, I think, to Oakland, is that we have developed block by block neighborhood core groups, which come together to prepare for disasters, but have also now become neighborhood watch groups, and also deal with maybe doing a neighborhood garden or bringing the community together. And that's pretty important in a city like Oakland, where we speak 130 languages and where we're very, very diverse, not just ethnically, but economically. Oakland, I think, is one of the last big cities that has still blue-collar workers, low-income workers, the rising technocrat class, as well as very, very wealthy people. So we live shoulder to shoulder, and we need to build resilience together. So I think, to me, it is strengthening neighborhoods. We have some initiatives that make our community schools community centers. And so if you break my city down, you're about 60 different neighborhoods. And so if we can organize neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, to look out for each other, not just for disasters, but also go back to that small town where we look after each other's children. And so I'll end with this. So this summer, as one of my initiatives to bring down violence, we've taken over neighborhood parks and have had summer barbecues where we just bring everybody together. And in those neighborhoods, which are immigrant and African American, the community has started to come together. Crime goes down about 50% in those neighborhoods when we're doing that. And there are lasting ties around our children and strengthening our schools that you can't count. So while we're organizing on one issue, we're really organizing on many if we do it on a neighborhood level and a block by block level that brings us together across race, language, and class.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, it feels like one of the fundamental challenges of resilience, as the mayor, Landrieu, and I were talking about backstage, is it both has to be top-down, and 100 Resilient Cities is really about a top-down intervention in some ways, right? Hiring mayors, a chief resilience officer, and supporting those people with a plan and a technical assistance to create a plan. But it will mean nothing without the bottom-up approach. When crisis happens, when stresses happen, when shocks happen, it's really the communities at the basic levels that come together, that support each other, that's going to be so important in terms of the city's footprint. And I wonder if some of the other mayors talk about how you are addressing, because one of the things we were very impressed with across these cities, as well as the others in the first cohort, was how they leveraged these partnerships and really got to work at the grassroots level.
Thank you, man.
I'll just, again, 2 big things. One, it does take a lot of money to build things that protect you. And cities don't generally have that kind of money. New Orleans is a great example of this. Our coast is eroding at 100 yards every 45 minutes. So by the time we leave here, we will have lost 100 yards of coast. We have lost enough coast that's the size of the state of Delaware over the past 50 years. And when the coast goes away, the estuary goes away, the fisheries go away, but also does the protection when the storm comes in. So if the wind is more and the water's higher, the storm surge, of course, heightens, and of course things get wet. And when you stay wet for a long time, it destroys things. So rebuilding the coast is important. It costs a lot of money to do that. Now, the nation, because it hasn't been focused on resilience, hasn't really focused on, well, how much money the federal government is taking out of the land of Louisiana, because we produce most of the oil and gas for the country. We produce about $5 billion a year for the rest of America. They give us a nickel back for every dollar that we send them. So if the nation was in a resilience mindset, and the notion was to fix what you broke, right? And in other words, to conserve and restore so we can keep doing things for a long time, the issue wouldn't be drill or not to drill. The issue would be, how do we drill and continue to keep the thing that produces what we are? That's what having a resilient mindset would produce. So that's the first thing. The second thing is levees to protect the water, to protect the engine, and that costs $14 billion to fix. So to your point, there's only so much money out there, and major infrastructure improvements cost billions. In Sandy, it cost $60 billion, $14 billion in New Orleans. Local governments don't have that money on their own, and so there's going to have to be a way to finance these massive projects. And in order to do that from a federal level, the national governments are going to have to understand that funding things locally is a matter of national purpose. You can only get there if you think about it in terms of resilience. If you think about it the way America thinks about it, which is the federal government's supposed to do one thing, the state's supposed to do another, and the locals are supposed to do another, and we'll show up at Christmas, at Thanksgiving, and other family holidays just to meet and have a family reunion, as opposed to every day, all day, what we do on the ground, we do together. And so in New Orleans, one of the things we've been able to do is to make sure that everybody's in the room all the time. Federal, state, local, not-for-profits, faith-based communities, neighborhood leaders, to do the thing that Mayor Quan talked about, because she's exactly right. It not only has to be right up here on the ground, it's got to be so tightly knit together that it's interwoven. I think, Judith, you used the word inextricably linked. That's a good phrase, right? And so you've seen when that trick that they showed you when you were in third grade, when you put a reed and you broke it, but if you put a whole bunch of reeds together, it was much harder. The same thing is true. And think about woven and intricate fabrics. And if you weave it together like that on the ground, when the bad thing comes, this is just much harder to break apart. And I think if you just think about it as a way, as opposed to a thing, it helps you design something a little bit better.
Marcel, can I bring you in here? Yeah, good.
Tout à fait. Voilà, je voulais un peu expliquer, parce que tout à l'heure, on a beaucoup parlé de phénomènes naturels. Moi, je veux surtout aborder la question de la résilience.
We've talked a lot about natural disaster,
par rapport aux
environmental
conséquences de ces phénomènes naturels.
I would like to talk about the resilience
Et j'ai
issue.
parlé, moi, de résilience en termes d'anticipation des phénomènes.
For us, the main dimension of
Le
resilience
Sénégal est dans un pays sahélien, c'est-à-dire c'est un pays où il ne pleut pas. On a 3 mois de pluie et on n'a pas 1000 mètres d'eau par an.
Senegal is part of the Sahel area, and therefore we
Donc
only have 3 months of water per year.
Régulièrement, c'est cette masse de jeunes, femmes et de garçons qui quittent les zones rurales parce qu'ils n'ont pas de travail pour venir s'installer en ville.
The main issue we have actually in terms of the population is that each time there's a drought, there's an influx of women and children who come into our urban areas.
De ces populations, ça pose un problème d'urbanisme,
Therefore, we
ça
have many
pose un
related
problème
issues.
de les installer et d'infrastructures. Mais
house them.
le problème, c'est que ces jeunes et femmes n'ont pas de métier, n'ont pas de diplôme.
The additional,
rien faire. Ils
the
ne font
additional
que vendre.
issue is that these women, these children don't have skills, they don't have jobs.
Et votre ville est transformée en marché, les rues, les trottoirs. Qu'est-ce qui...
And therefore, all they can do is sell on the street, and therefore the whole city, the streets of the entire city become markets, and you have people selling everywhere in the street.
Qu'on ramène dans leur maison en brousse.
And this is not we don't have the option of taking them and bringing them back to their villages or rural areas.
Cette nature, en zone urbaine, nous, on est obligé d'anticiper. D'abord, on crée les lieux où ils peuvent mener leurs activités.
Therefore, it is critical for us to be prepared. We must
par un travail de conscientisation, on leur explique que ce qu'ils cherchent en ville, ils peuvent le trouver chez eux d'abord.
And we manage to sell them in specific areas that we prepare in advance, and we teach them also that
ici, la ville ne peut pas accueillir tout le monde.
that cities are not necessarily the best place for them.
Tout le monde ne peut pas être commerçant.
And we spend a certain amount of time to educate them, tell them that not everybody can be a retailer, a shop owner in a city, and that maybe they should go back to the rural areas.
Pour créer des lieux, de marché, de commerce.
And therefore, we are spending millions every
Donc,
year
nous sommes
to
interpellés là avec l'État.
arrange places where there can be markets. And therefore,
C'est un problème national.
we
Pour lui trouver des solutions, il faut une démarche.
always call upon the state, the Senegalese state, to intervene and to provide solution, because it's a national issue. It's not just an issue for Dakar. This is an issue for the entire country.
And also to pick up on Michael's point, it's also something that can't be imposed. It's something that can't be imposed. Sorry, you need to. It's something that can't be imposed from the top down solely.
C'est pas quelque chose qui peut être imposé d'en haut.
The entire city has to be, on board with the program. Has to kind of share in, a sense of being supportive of what you're trying to do.
Oui, parce que vous avez vu un peu par exemple, on a de beaux quartiers qui étaient lotis où il n'y avait aucun problème.
Very, very true. In fact, we have a beautiful
Ces jeunes viennent occuper les trottoirs et les routes pour faire du
and
commerce.
there's never been any problem in those neighborhoods. And suddenly you have young people, the youth, invading
c'est qu'on est un peu envahi par les
sidewalks.
produits chinois. Ça coûte moins cher et ça se va plus facilement.
Also invited by Chinese
Donc
product because
tous
they're
les jeunes vendent
expensive.
des produits chinois.
Now all the youth, they
Et
all
ils
want
les vendent
Chinese
partout.
product. So you have people everywhere now asking for that.
Donc le problème, c'est d'abord, pour régler le problème, c'est de discuter avec les Chinois et de réguler l'importation des produits chinois dans le pays.
For one of the issues, of course, is to talk to the Chinese government
Déterminer des lieux où le commerce peut se faire.
and to regulate the import of Chinese product into Senegal so
Faire
that
comprendre aux jeunes Sénégalais que la vente de produits importés n'est pas source de développement.
and that we sort of organize this
Et qu'il doit
market
plus
so that
aller cultiver
Chinese
et
products should
produire
not
des
be
choses
sold
qui pourraient
everywhere,
se vendre mieux.
and that products are also a matter
Donc,
of
c'est un phénomène
cultural
social
development,
très
so that
difficile.
we also
Et
produce
qui
and we just
découle un
don't
peu de
import.
cette sécheresse-là, qui est un phénomène naturel.
All of these issues are actually related
Parce
to
que
this
ces jeunes qui étaient des pêcheurs qui ne vendent plus, qui
drought,
ne produisent plus,
because
font
all
ça.
the droughts that we
Le
have
deuxième phénomène,
affect
avec les
those
apports de
populations that
pêche,
live from fishing.
Dakar est une zone côtière. Les populations vivaient de la pêche.
We, for example, had an area where
Avec
people
les
were
accords
living
de
mostly
pêche avec
from
l'Union
fishing.
européenne, avec les pêcheurs chinois, coréens, nos capacités ont baissé.
And due to agreements that have been signed with China, with the European Union,
Et
with
le
many other
phénomène
countries,
social qu'on a, c'est que ces jeunes maintenant,
our ratios of fishing have
avec les
been
pirogues
lowered.
qui servaient à faire la pêche, mettent dedans des immigrants qui vont en Europe.
And now these fishing
de
boats
pêcher, ils
are
font
not
des
used for fishing
transports de
anymore,
migration.
and they're used for migrating populations.
C'est des phénomènes sociaux auxquels on est confronté.
And this is a typical example
Et
of
qui
a social
aujourd'hui sont récurrents.
issue that we are facing
Quelle
on a
devrait être l'attitude de résilience à ce niveau?
recurrent basis. So what should be our behavior in terms of resilience?
Conscientisation, éducation,
Awareness,
mobilisation,
education,
investissement.
investments.
Vous voyez, le spectre est assez large.
So it's a whole range of
Et
issues that we're
le défi
facing.
est important.
And this is critical for us.
Claudia, Restrepo, your thoughts on this? So, a lot of the issues with raised by resilience are deep-seated social problems. They are national issues that are very hard to tackle at the city level. How do you cope with that? How do you address that?
Bueno, nosotros insistimos mucho en un concepto dentro de la resiliencia que para nosotros es fundamental, y es que la resiliencia no la hacemos los gobiernos. Eso es una, digamos que nosotros acompañamos, facilitamos, pero no la construimos. La resiliencia es una construcción humana y como construcción humana está, digamos que se teje en las redes de relacionamiento entre humanos. Y por esa misma razón es que para nosotros el asunto asociado a la cultura y a la manera de crear nuevas maneras de leernos y entendernos dentro de esa cultura es donde está el centro del reto para nosotros como ciudad. Yo escucho a los compañeros de la mesa cuando hablamos de resiliencia en ese sentido de la gestión del riesgo y de sus experiencias y de lo que son las vivencias, y uno recoge una cosa común, y es que realmente la resiliencia no se mide en el momento en el que ocurre el evento. La resiliencia se mide obviamente en la capacidad que tiene uno de reaccionar al evento, pero más allá de eso, a aprender posteriormente de lo que él dejó. Y al aprender de lo que él dejó, poder sistematizar y construir. Hoy nuestro gran reto en la ciudad, por ejemplo, y es una de las grandes expectativas que tenemos al participar de esta red, es la consolidación de los sistemas de información. Porque uno de los grandes problemas que tenemos nosotros como gobiernos, en la mayoría, yo creo que en la mayoría de las ciudades del mundo, obviamente, seguramente nosotros tendremos más, es poder hacer ejercicios de sistematización para poder seguir aprendiendo. O sea, así como los seres humanos tenemos esa competencia de aprendizaje, para los gobiernos se hace más difícil a veces desarrollar esa competencia de aprendizaje. Y nosotros entendemos todo este, digamos, como el gran reto que viene para las ciudades resilientes, es poder que los gobiernos de estas ciudades generen una inteligencia que permita que esa inteligencia cree aprendizaje que pueda, pueda convocar un aprendizaje de sociedad. Es decir, como insisto, como la resiliencia es una competencia humana, los gobiernos como aparatos que somos, que no son, lo que tenemos que hacer es casi crear una inteligencia artificial, y esa inteligencia lo que debe promover es que efectivamente construyamos procesos de aprendizaje dentro de la misma ciudad. Y así poder romper cosas. Por ejemplo, nosotros hoy en Medellín es muy curioso, tenemos una cultura, como lo hemos dicho, una cultura con muchos años de violencia, lo cual ha hecho que es difícil que podamos negar que no hay un respeto a la vida, como nosotros mismos no podemos negarnos esa afirmación, porque todavía seguimos luchando e insistiendo porque tener 0 muertos, y para nosotros cada día que logramos 0 muertos en la ciudad es un logro inmenso. Pero adicionalmente tenemos una cultura de la solidaridad muy marcada, tal solidaridad que pues, una ciudad como la nuestra, que vivió bombas, vivió sicariato, vivió grandes afectaciones de violencia, pues siguiéramos viviendo allí personas que muchas de ellas salieron del país, muchas salieron de la ciudad, y que uno lo mira como hacia atrás y uno dice, ¿cómo resistimos ese proceso? ¿Cómo resistimos bombas? ¿Cómo resistimos sicariato? ¿Cómo resistimos ver a tantas familias, a tantas personas secuestradas, cercanas, que conocíamos? Pero realmente cuando uno mira eso, paralelo a esa resistencia, a eso que ocurría, había muchas personas, toda una sociedad, toda una masa crítica, pensando cómo resolverlo, pensando qué hacer. Y luego la posibilidad de concretarlo en unos gobiernos que efectivamente materializaran la conversación de la ciudad, porque es como una combinación, y con esto termino. Yo creo que esta es la clave, o para mí es la llave más importante, es cómo lograr que una sociedad converse para resolver sus problemas, porque los problemas no se los va a resolver, no se los vamos a resolver en el gobierno, se resuelven en esa construcción colectiva. Pero cómo lograr hacer una buena conexión entre eso que la sociedad conversa y sueña juntos y la materialización de esa conversación en un buen gobierno. Eso nosotros lo hemos llamado, como clave para nosotros ha sido buenos gobiernos y sociedades participantes. Cuando nosotros logramos esa llave entre una sociedad participante y un buen gobierno, entendiéndolo como transparente, como legal, que es para nosotros la palabra más importante de nuestro país, en nuestra ciudad, y queremos que sea así, lo siga siendo, es cómo instalar esa legalidad completamente en la cultura de nuestra sociedad, y de esa manera esas dos combinaciones nos permitan seguir aprendiendo para resolver los problemas que vienen.
Thank you. Michael?
Maybe just to pick up on that, I think when we framed the 100 Resilient Cities Challenge, we really talked explicitly about a broad range of chronic stresses and acute shocks. And it's for many of the reasons that you've heard described here. When you think about what it takes to become resilient against whatever it is, there are certain things which are hazard specific. So maybe communities at risk to flooding do land use planning slightly differently, or those at seismic risk strengthen their building codes. But many of the things that we're talking about here, good governance, effective government, healthy communities, good public health, a flexible, well-trained workforce, all of those things, those are germane across a whole spectrum of stresses and shocks. And so that's really why we're so excited for cities to learn from each other. Just because the hazards of Dakar are somewhat different than Medellin, they will still have lots to learn from each other, because at the root of resilience are the same fundamental building blocks.
I would say that the important thing I hope that we'll learn is that, because particularly New Orleans, and I don't know your city, but New Orleans and Medellin and Oakland have had high youth violence rates, that I think that's the canary for us, that our children and our youth in some communities are disenfranchised and they don't share in the dream. And so this is an opportunity as we fight for the social justice or the social equity in both making our cities more resilient and making them greener, that we include them in particular. And that's one of the things I'm looking for, because I know Mitch and I are involved in an African-American male project. In fact, we're meeting in New Orleans in February to talk about the fact that in our cities, African-American boys have 3 times the unemployment rate as the national average, and that that's resulted also in violence. And I've seen that where I've been able to provide jobs, and many of them green jobs, that the violence rate in some of those neighborhoods now been cut by 50%. So I believe jobs stop bullets, and that it creates the ability for children to dream outside of their present reality, and that's what we need. We need to raise a generation of dreamers. And so one of the most exciting things that's happening in our city right now is Mitch Kapoor, who this ages me, and anybody who knows what Lotus is a program that we used back in the 60s. He's the founder of Lotus, and he's come in and he's made his mission is to make sure that minority students and women participate in the high-tech innovation. And so we just recently had a hackathon. And several of the problems that the kids were addressing were things like, how do you get food equity and deal with food deserts in our city? How do you help homeless children communicate? And one of the most interesting ones, Mitch, is I want to see if they finalize it. How do you help young people talk to police in a way that's non-threatening? And so I think one of the interesting things that, because I know the Rockefeller's interest is how we can use technology in making our cities more resilient, either whether it's for communication or even just for, I'm believing now that we all have these little computers that are called phones, how we do search and rescue, how we plan and prepare for disasters is going to be very, very different, because almost everyone now can afford a cell phone. And so I think you have to get back to social equity. How do we include everybody, and particularly how we include young people?
Yeah. Thank you. So you're just talking about some opportunities. Perhaps the other mayors would like to come in here. We've been talking quite a lot about problems. What about the things you are able to do? What are the things that you're kind of most excited about, or where you see some of the biggest potential for improving resilience? Anyone want to?
Bon, c'est vrai que effectivement, nous nous rendons compte que nos villes ont des similitudes, que ce soit Medellin ou que ce soit la ville d'Oakland. Le problème qu'on a, c'est nous devons résorber et régler la question des jeunes et de leur chômage.
Clearly, there are some common points between Medellin, New Orleans, and my city. Our main issue is that we must face the challenges that the youth are presenting to us now.
Le problème de Dakar, ce n'est pas un problème de violence. On ne connaît pas de violence.
The issue in Dakar is not violence. We don't really have a violence issue in Dakar.
Le problème, c'est comment insérer les jeunes dans des activités productrices ou rentables.
The issue is how to make sure that the youth are brought into the society so that they are fully integrated into productive activities.
Et on a deux catégories de jeunes.
We have two kinds of youth.
Nous avons les jeunes de Dakar qui vivaient de la pêche et qui n'ont plus de poissons à pêcher.
The youth from Dakar who used to live from fishing and who don't have that option anymore. They don't even have their boats to fish anymore.
Avec eux, nous sommes en train de réfléchir aujourd'hui à la création d'espaces de pisciculture. Parce que Dakar est une ville côtière, hein. Nous sommes une presqu'île.
Now, in order to rescue that category of the population, we are talking and working with them on how we could have them now be involved in a new type of activity, kind of most industrial cultures.
Donc, pour éviter que ces jeunes n'utilisent les pirogues pour transporter des immigrants vers l'Europe.
Because what we want to make sure that they don't use those pirogues, those small fishing boats or any types of boat like this, which are not used for fishing anymore, to migrate workers towards Europe. We don't want them to do that.
Nous sommes en train d'expérimenter depuis 8 mois des projets de pisciculture et d'aquaculture.
And therefore, for about 8 months now, we've been experimenting with them on new projects of aquaculture and pisciculture.
Le deuxième grand problème auquel nous sommes confrontés, c'est les jeunes maintenant, parce qu'il y a la sécheresse, ils ne peuvent plus cultiver, qui viennent à Dakar, ils n'ont pas de métier, ils n'ont pas de savoir-faire.
Now, the other category of youth we're facing in Dakar are the youth coming from the rural areas, who, because of the severe and repeated drought, cannot live on their land anymore, are moving to Dakar, and we need to know what we're going to do with them.
Et leur activité défigure la ville.
Their activities currently are disfiguring the city.
Puisque nous ne pouvons pas les ramener dans leur village parce qu'ils n'ont pas de quoi cultiver, il n'y a pas d'eau.
Bringing them back to their villages is not an option because there would be no water there.
Nous avons commencé à prendre certaines zones de la ville pour créer des zones de commerce.
And therefore, we've carved out, so to speak, parts of the city that would be dedicated to retail activities for them.
Pour qu'ils quittent les rues et les trottoirs, nous sommes en train de construire des malls et des établissements où ils vont commercer.
Therefore, instead of having them randomly spread out in the streets of the city, we want to bring them in those specific areas where we're building mall and shopping areas that are dedicated to them.
Et nous leur imposons aussi de vendre des produits locaux.
And also,
l'artisanat.
We are requiring them to sell local products that are made by local artisans.
Maintenant, on a besoin de l'expérience des autres villes pour gérer les inondations parce que nous en connaissons.
Now, we also will learn and are expecting to learn quite a lot from the experience of other cities because we are too facing flooding sometimes.
C'est pourquoi le projet de la Fondation Rockefeller est une très bonne opportunité pour nous, pour la gestion des inondations, l'érosion côtière et un peu la gestion des crédits carbone, parce que nous sommes en train de diversifier aussi nos sources d'énergie.
And therefore, that is why the initiative from the Rockefeller Foundation is such an opportunity for us because it allows us to deal with these issues, shoreline erosions, rural population moving into the cities, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Landrieu, opportunities in New Orleans?
Well, necessity forces you to innovate. I've said that if you've ever had a near-death experience, like many of us have had as a result of natural disasters or personal physical problems, it clarifies your mind like nothing else. And if you want to survive, you have to adapt. And so New Orleans, again, very consistent with some of the comments that I've made up here, is trying to protect herself physically. And one of the great opportunities has been how to physically protect the city. So we are engaging in discussions about how to restore the coast naturally. We are in the process of building physical things that help protect us. One of them is levees, which we've now ringed the city with. $14 billion was that investment. We also have changed the way water flows in and out of the city, which has to be, by nature, or by government in New Orleans, a partnership between the federal government, because it is the Corps of Engineers, and the local government, which is our local entity that governs how we clean water, how we provide water, and then how we flush water out of the city. And every day, somebody from the federal government and the local government speak to each other 3 or 4 times a day about water levels in the city that are operated at one end of the city by a local entity and one end by a federal entity. And so we have that communion, if you will, that has been created by the necessity of protecting the city. That's the second part. The third part has been an emergency operation response, actually being prepared for whatever might come our way. And then finally, and this is just a very interesting discussion today, because most people here are not talking about infrastructure or emergency. If you were at an emergency operation or a Homeland Security conference, they would be talking about bigger vehicles, radios that could speak to each other, interoperability, command and control, who is the boss, and then how we build bigger things. I think what you're hearing today, and this is very interesting, and it's very intuitive and it's very wise, is that we can only be as strong as our weakest link. And the link is an individual human being. So, Mayor, when you talk about a big thing, forcing people who live high to all congregate in one place, and you have a lot of people that used to live out here all congregated into one space, it brings challenges that are very hard to undo. You said twice you can't move them back to where they come from because they wouldn't have water. You have to think about what that looks like. So Port-au-Prince, for example, in Haiti, the exact same problem. When Haiti had their major catastrophe some years ago, and they're still going through getting themselves out of harm's way, a lot of people that used to live up came down. And the challenges overwhelm any local government because they don't have the resources to feed, to house, to close, much less to educate. And so as the vice mayor said for Medellin, interesting, she's the vice mayor of education and culture. And in the city of New Orleans, one of the innovative things that we're doing is understanding that education is the key to making people smart, and smart is the key to making people strong, and then culture can be the thing that ties all of that together. And so a lot of the work that we're doing on resilience is tying neighborhoods together through music, art, history, common purpose, and then making sure that our schools, when we rebuilt them, we didn't put them back like they were. So the storm came in, it destroyed all of the buildings. We did not build all the schools back where they were. We took the money that we had for all of the schools. Because we had less people, we were able to consolidate the number of schools that we had, and then we physically rebuilt the schools that were much different than the physical buildings that were there. The new buildings are now 21st century, knowledge-based, technology-driven entities, and we went to a new education model. And so on the healthcare, we did the same exact thing. As the nation is embroiled in the Affordable Care Act, we just figured out that we were going to do the thing that everybody agreed on, which was to move from primary and acute care, which is in one building, to preventative care, which is spread out to 88 primary health care clinics that now take care of 360,000 people, and then only have them go to a central location for the more acute work. We completely transformed how people integrated into the system, because what we had before, and this is the hardest thing for a community to admit about themselves, what they had before was not good. In other words, it was not the storm or the catastrophic event that caused the problem. It just made what you had more readily visible and created more stress. So if you had a strong community, if you had something that was well built, it was likely that it did not get damaged as much, and you want to put it back like it was. But in New Orleans, we took a moment to really think about ourselves and to think about what we wanted to become rather than to put it back like it exactly was. Now, this is no small thing, because you know from your personal experience, when something bad happens to you, the first thing that you want is security. You want something that you know. You will reach back to the thing that was. And reaching back to the thing that was is not always the right thing to do. And you have to help talk to each other to make sure that everybody has bought in, as Mayor Quan has said, to a new vision. Because a lot of us like our history, we like our culture, even if it's bad. In New Orleans, we like to eat a lot.
That's not bad.
And if you talk about changing the culture of food in New Orleans, as opposed to talking about the culture of being healthy, you should be very careful with how you have that discussion. But there is a way to have that which makes you feel good and to be strong. And I think that's got to be a part of the resilience discussion as well.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Restrepo.
Yo quiero contarles una historia que hace un mes, alrededor de un mes, bueno, voy a decir por qué cuento esta historia. Uno de los asuntos que creo que no hemos tocado a fondo y que la Fundación Rockefeller lo tenía muy claro en los puntos de la postulación, era la importancia del sistema en su totalidad, es decir, los otros actores, además del gobierno, además de las personas, los medios de comunicación, el sector empresarial, cómo jugaba todo el sistema. Y uno de los grandes aprendizajes que hemos tenido nosotros en la ciudad va muy dirigido a que solo en el momento en que nos hemos entendido como un sistema político, social, integrado, hemos podido resolver, y aquí va mi historia. Si bien nuestro trabajo en la gestión del riesgo ha ido muy dirigida a la vivencia que hemos tenido alrededor de los temas de violencia, hace un mes, quienes conozcan un poco la historia de Medellín saben que llevamos apostándole muy fuerte al tema del urbanismo como una forma de desarrollo de ciudad. Eso hace que el próximo año vayamos a tener el Foro Urbano Mundial en la ciudad de Medellín. Y hace un mes nos ocurrió una cosa absolutamente extravagante o extraña, y fue la caída de un edificio desplomado completamente de la nada, de una constructora absolutamente fuerte, no ocurría en el país, muy pocos casos tenemos en Latinoamérica parecido, parecía como si hubiera caído sobre ella, se desploma completamente frente a una columna. ¿Por qué traigo el ejemplo? Porque todo el sistema de resiliencia de la ciudad funcionó frente a esa eventualidad. En ese evento hubo 10 muertos, desafortunadamente, pudo haber cientos de familias muertas. Todo funcionó de la siguiente manera. Primero, la solidaridad de las familias frente al problema del edificio, la acción del gobierno, porque nosotros ordenamos la evacuación del edificio porque el sistema de información funcionó, la operación funcionó, se evacuó un día antes y se ordenó la evacuación hasta tanto se hicieran los estudios. Desafortunadamente, la constructora decidió que no necesitaban estudios y entraron a hacer el reforzamiento estructural de la edificación. Al hacer el reforzamiento estructural de la edificación, al día siguiente, el fallo de la columna es contundente y mueren 10 trabajadores mientras están haciendo la recuperación de la edificación. ¿Por qué traigo esa historia? Porque nos demoramos 2 semanas haciendo la recuperación de las personas que quedaron en el evento, debido a que la falla es una edificación de 7 torres en línea, y la caída de una de las columnas o de una de las torres hizo fallar la columna siguiente. Entonces, para poder entrar a hacer la recuperación de las personas, teníamos un riesgo inminente de la torre siguiente, que iba a caer frente a los demás. Eso generó que todo el sistema reaccionara completamente, la comunidad, los medios de comunicación, que es un asunto que me parece muy importante traerlo acá, y es que los medios de comunicación juegan un papel muy importante en los procesos de resiliencia de una ciudad. Yo no sé cómo hayan sido las experiencias, pero siempre que hay catástrofes, o en el caso cuando son esos procesos de violencia, los medios de comunicación pueden o ayudar a que se desarrolle bien, que uno salga avante del proceso, o puede generar todos los tropiezos y todas las dificultades para que así sea. Cuando la ciudad logra desarrollar resiliencia en el sistema, logra crear una conciencia de responsabilidad en el sistema. Y es que cada parte del sistema atiende lo que le corresponde en su alcance. Y este ejemplo que yo les ponía fue una cosa muy bonita para nosotros, porque la capacidad de respuesta que tuvo la ciudad estuvo determinada fundamentalmente por la responsabilidad en la respuesta de los medios de comunicación, la responsabilidad en la respuesta de las autoridades, de la comunidad en su solidaridad, de los organismos en su totalidad, y en el poder restablecernos rápidamente frente a una calamidad de esa naturaleza que nunca la habíamos tenido, y que hizo que nos diéramos cuenta de algo como ciudad, y era que pese a todos los problemas que hemos tenido en los últimos 20 años, los últimos 10, habíamos logrado algo más que poder pensar en la transformación de la ciudad y pensar que hoy podamos entendernos como una ciudad innovadora en prácticas sociales y urbanas. Y era que habíamos aprendido a ser rápidos a la manera de responder a los problemas que la ciudad estaba viviendo en los diferentes ámbitos, no necesariamente en aquellos donde nos hemos venido preparando durante mucho tiempo. Yo creo que lo que quiero plantear con esto es que cuando yo los escucho y se preparan, por ejemplo, frente a la inundación o se preparan frente a la gestión del riesgo, lo más importante es que la ciudad se prepara para atender problemas de todas las magnitudes con una visión distinta, porque ya la resiliencia se instala en la manera como se toman las decisiones dentro de ella. Y se instala, lo cual hace que ya la manera no es si reaccionamos frente al desastre, cómo reaccionamos, no. Se convierte en una manera de gestión, en una manera de gestionar nuestros problemas de cualquier naturaleza. Por eso, obviamente, yo soy vicealcalde del tema de educación y cultura, pero creo que por eso la gran apuesta que nosotros insistimos permanentemente es que cuando instalamos en la cultura de las diferentes instancias del sistema social, logramos que la capacidad que desarrollamos frente a eventos específicos se constituya en una competencia y una capacidad de gestión de la manera como atendemos nuestra manera de habitar la ciudad. Y yo creo que eso es para nosotros la mayor oportunidad que la Fundación nos ofrece al compartir estas experiencias y al poder escucharnos, es mejorar nuestras maneras de gestión de los problemas de las ciudades, sociales, de violencia, financieros. O sea, hay muchas fracturas y muchas fragilidades en el ejercicio de hacer ciudad. Yo creo que esta es una oportunidad para que definamos modos de gestionar la ciudad basados en algo fundamental, que es en un poder grandísimo que tenemos los seres humanos, una competencia que si la desarrollamos puede ser extraordinaria, que es la resiliencia. Yo creo que esa es la gran oportunidad que nosotros tenemos, cada una de estas ciudades participando de esta red.
Very good.
Thank you very much indeed. I want to throw it open now, perhaps to questions from the floor, if anyone has any. I don't know. Do we have mics, or how are we running this? Yeah, I think there is a mic. Yes. You said there's one here. Thanks very much.
Just listening in, it seems like the magnitude of the issues that you face, you know, really, as we heard this morning, is you really do need some kind of paradigm shift. And I guess it feels like the elephant in the room is the politics as well as the economics and everything else. And I'm not sure how much the Rockefeller Foundation can get involved in that, but it just seems like there's a lot of, the the whole self-determination comes into play. And it can be self-determination to control your own water levels, to self-determination to be linked to a city around the world so that you have some diversification in terms of your linkages to nature and those kind of things. But it just seems like as mayors, that's the critical thing that you face is in order to to empower you to make changes, you need more self-determination. And I wonder how the Rockefeller Foundation can be involved in that.
Interesting thought. Anyone? Oh, go, Michael. Do you want to?
So maybe let me take a stab from the specific question about how we see 100 Resilient Cities addressing some of those good points. So one is we see one of the major challenges in cities to be the complexity of cities in the ecosystems that they operate. We've heard about the federal, we've heard about non-governmental actors, we've heard about the private sector, all of those things. And one of the things we hope is that this Chief Resilience Officer will be able to cut across and bring some organization to the challenges at these various levels. So, and really be the person who, and the office who looks across the sectors and the silos to connect disparate efforts on this. And I'll just give you one quick example. One of the things we often see, particularly in the Global South, is this connection between solid waste, flooding, and public health. So solid waste doesn't get effectively collected. It gets into the drainage system, which causes flooding, which causes public health. Often, those three things are addressed at different levels, sometimes at a local level, sometimes at a municipal level, sometimes at the provincial or the national level. And so if you look at them holistically, the business case for addressing that is clear, and you would do it easily. But because these issues are owned in their different silos, no one's connecting those dots. And so one of the hopes is that this Chief Resilience Officer empowered by the strategy will bring some organization to help address those things.
That's, on that note, that will not happen unless, and this is the important part, unless the person that's in charge, and that on the local level, that would be the mayor, I would suppose. It would certainly be in the city of New Orleans. Has a way of governing that allows what the Chief Resilient Officer brings to be heard by and implemented into things. One of the ways that we act in the city of New Orleans is that the deputy mayors are an ensemble. And so if I decide as mayor of the city of New Orleans that one of the priorities of the city should be the reduction of youth violence, for example. Every discussion that we have in the deputy mayor's meeting about education or about wastewater or about hurricane preparedness, whatever it is, one of the questions that person always asks is, how does that help me achieve the objective that the mayor has set out for us? And so then the resilience officer gets to ask the same question. Then it gets to be an integrated, and that's the only thing that breaks down silos. Government yearns to be siloed. It's just the natural tendency is for it to become siloed because that's what's easiest to do. And there has to be a purposeful mission to break down the silos and to integrate at the management level. But here's the thing. If it's just integrated here, if it's not integrated vertically and horizontally, mean federal, state, local. So one of the innovative things that we did in the city of New Orleans that the Obama administration picked up on and has worked together on and has now created a model of is how we call it SC2, Strong Cities 2. And it is designed to bring the executive branch of the federal government in complete unison with the executive branch, in this instance, of the city of New Orleans, and they're doing this with many other cities and the states there. So that when my education person starts talking about education policy, they've communicated with Arne Duncan's team on the federal level or Governor Jindal's team on the state level so that it's integrated that way, and then across all of the deputy mayor's pieces. That is a way of governing. And whether it's resilience or whether it's public safety or whether it's wastewater treatment or whether it's health and security or whether it's culture, that has to be the way. And so we could be just as soon sitting here talking to police chiefs and talking about violence, and the answer would be the same. It won't happen unless the way of governing becomes different. Now, one of the things, this is just my personal observation, that's happening certainly in the United States of America, is the country is lurching towards this new way of doing things. It's manifest in extremes right now. Occupy Wall Street, Tea Party, government's too big, government's too small. That's just, I'm not saying that's not important. It's a lot of noise. The people that are in the middle that are actually governing and trying to fix it are finding a way to say we need the resources that we couldn't get on our own, but you have to give us room on the local level to determine how those resources are spent. Congress has no interest in doing that because when they give you money, they want to control what you do. The problem is congressmen and women are not close enough to the ground to determine whether what you do is good enough. And so we're creating this new model of being able to stand up on our own with the help of our friends. But so I would say what finances globally and federally needs to be run locally. And we haven't really figured out how to do both of those things. Hence, you have a disconnect between the needs on the local level that are important because they are tied together nationally and internationally, but how do you get the resources to actually do that? And infrastructure is the biggest example of where that's going to be a challenge because local governments, for example, cannot build the kind of things they need with the limited amount of resources that would come just from the people who are paying taxes in a particular jurisdiction. And I would argue, like on the issue of violence, for example, it may not be a federal issue, meaning the government says that's not our complete response, that needs to be local, but it is a national issue because youth violence in Oakland, youth violence in New Orleans, youth violence in Baltimore has a massive consequence for our ability to have safe streets and safe cities. And so the federal government, in my opinion, has a role to play, although it's not managing the police department, but it is certainly showing up with resources because it affects the nation in a whole. And that's the same kind of concept that has to come into play as we deal with resilience and why the federal government has to be at the table because, as we've said, unless we're strong in our cities, we cannot be strong nationally and we can't be strong internationally. And I think that mind shift has got to take place and we have to push it much faster than it's going right now.
I'm hoping that the network will bring together some new public-private partnerships. So, for instance, a large number of your 33 cities are port cities. The ports are critical to the national economy, and if we're changing to a society that makes things again and exports, we have to protect our ports. So all of our ports are going to be affected by climate change issues. We're just finished electrifying all of our berths in Oakland, but also the rising seas with climate change. If we're going to really seriously in America take on global warming, we have to take on cars. And so in Oakland, we're going to reach these very aggressive goals, and this is going to take a lot of public education, is that we have to get everyone to take one less car trip a week, which is very doable and you can define that. But really the long-term answer is in an area like the Bay Area, we need more dollars in public transportation. So few dollars go into public transportation. Everything still goes into freeways. We're not adjusting, but you know, I just missed the Beijing crisis when I was in Beijing a couple of weeks ago where people couldn't breathe and were locked up and they had a 36-hour traffic jam. That's an international problem. And so we can create, I think, infrastructure banks in Oakland, and I didn't mention my major infrastructure issue. I have a short-term issue. I literally have 15,000 buildings that if we retrofit them, we'll preserve those buildings. So retrofit is about 30 to 40,000 for maybe a $2 million building. But nobody wants to lend for that, even though it will save and preserve those buildings in the long run and save maybe 15,000 lives, because that may be happening or maybe not happening. But in California, you can bet it's going to happen. We're 8 years over our every 400-year earthquake cycle. So we just live on this borrowed time. And so I watched New Orleans very carefully because I felt it was the same thing. We knew the levees weren't strong enough as a government. We could have strengthened the levees earlier before that tragedy. And so I always say, you know, Oakland's the next Katrina. If we don't invest in these very economical infrastructure fixes, we're going to face much bigger disasters, flooding in different parts of the country. Congress has defunded things like retrofit help. And then when I heard about the hurricanes and the safe rooms, I was like, why don't we federally fund those? Thousands, hundreds of thousands of children's lives are at stake. So I actually think there has to be some public-private partnership on these infrastructure projects that will either help the economy or will save lives and make the nation as a whole more resilient. And it will be different things in different parts of the country, but they're smart investments because they save lives and long-term preserve our infrastructure. It's much more difficult to clean up after a building's been destroyed than it is to put $20,000, $30,000 in saving an apartment building that's worth millions of dollars.
Thank you. Interested in perspectives from outside the US on this, if I can, on that issue about the authority of mayors and relations with national government and the question of whether cities need more autonomy. Marcel, do you?
Oui, je crois que ce qui est intéressant un peu dans l'initiative de la Fondation Rockefeller,
I think that's what is really interesting.
C'est qu'elle a compris que dans la nouvelle gouvernance locale mondiale,
is that they understood that in the new type of local governance throughout the world,
il faut réfléchir et formuler global. C'est ce qu'on dit.
We must think globally and we must act globally.
Mais il faut toujours agir local. Si on veut être efficace, si on veut être efficient.
To be efficient,
tous les maires que nous sommes
aujourd'hui,
nous parlons du vécu quotidien de chacun de nos compatriotes et de nos concitoyens.
As mayors, we know how our
en termes de sécurité,
our residents live.
En termes de santé,
that's what we talk
en
about.
termes de bien-être.
We talk about their security, their health care, and well-being.
Quand il y a un problème dans nos villes, le premier interlocuteur du citoyen, c'est le maire.
Each time a citizen of any city has an issue,
quand il y a un désastre, c'est le maire. Quand il y a un accident, c'est le maire. Quand il y a un incendie, c'est le maire.
Whether it's a fire,
donc c'est l'interlocuteur, c'est le premier
you want to talk to City Hall,
qui est sollicité.
And the mayor is the first
donc,
one who's been
les gouvernements
asked questions.
Commencent à comprendre que désormais c'est la gouvernance locale qui est la bonne réponse.
And I think that now every leader understands that local government is key to
l'action publique.
Local public activity.
Que ce soit au niveau de la Banque mondiale, que ce soit au niveau des Nations Unies ou dans beaucoup d'organisations, désormais le maire a sa place.
In other words, in every forum, whether we're talking about global issues and international organizations, mayors are represented, mayors are present.
Et cette assemblée-ci est une formidable plateforme et une opportunité d'échange.
And this event is an exceptional platform for exchange.
C'est des leçons qu'on apprend de chacun.
For sharing expertise.
Les réalités peuvent être les mêmes.
And from learning from one another.
Sont différentes.
Realities can be similar, but the solutions will be different.
Ces échanges-là, nous apprenons des autres comment ils ont réglé des problèmes auxquels nous sommes confrontés.
And when we're here together, we learn from one another how we manage to solve particular issues.
Les résistances des autorités nationales, des gouvernements iront en s'estompant, c'est-à-dire en diminuant et en baissant.
I think the resistance from national governments will
parce que c'est ça le devenir.
Diminish over time, and local governments will take more and more importance. I think that's the future.
Fascinating. Thank you. Vice Mayor Restrepo.
Bueno, yo voy a las dos preguntas, a la inicial y a la que haces. Y llega un punto y es, lo primero es que estamos en un momento histórico frente al replanteamiento de nuestros sistemas políticos y a nuestras formas de gerencia de lo público sobre todo. Insistentemente uno siempre lo llevan a la diferencia entre la diferencia que hay entre la gestión pública y la gestión privada, y ahorita traían el ejemplo de en lo privado y en lo público y tú decías que eso no era del todo cierto, y lo que hay sobre la mesa es que definitivamente se tienen que refinar nuestras maneras de gobernar. Y en ese nivel de refinamiento de las maneras de gobernar está un poco la pregunta sobre si es la autonomía local o si es la fuerza de los gobiernos nacionales. Pero lo único con lo que uno sí tiene que tener claro, y ahorita lo hablábamos el alcalde y yo, cuando me preguntaba si la seguridad en Medellín la manejaba el gobierno local o si era una política nacional, yo le decía, nosotros somos autónomos, pero la seguridad es una política nacional. Pero allí llegamos al otro punto, y es que no tenemos acción sobre esa política local. Es decir, la política es nacional, podemos ayudar con cámaras, sistemas, monitoreos, pero no podemos intervenir más allá sobre la política. Y la pregunta que nos hacíamos es ¿cuál de los dos es mejor y cuál de los dos no es tan bueno? Y uno finalmente llega a que ninguno de los dos es suficientemente bueno, ni que lo manejes de manera exclusiva como un problema de la municipalidad, de lo local, ni que se maneje de manera exclusiva como una política nacional. Porque finalmente, insisto, las maneras de gerencia hoy de lo público conducen cada vez más a algo que se nos es muy difícil en los gobiernos, que es la posibilidad de trabajar de manera sectorial, de manera conjunta, y con la claridad de hasta aquí llego yo, aquí empiezas tú, pero conectados en el mismo propósito. Y el asunto es que las realidades ante las que estamos, las realidades de la contundencia de la naturaleza, la contundencia de nuestras problemáticas sociales que no se crearon ni ayer ni antier, sino que son históricas, hacen que definitivamente tengamos que repensarnos en nuestras maneras de gerencia de lo público. Entonces, a la pregunta de si es mejor la autonomía local, yo lo único que puedo contestar es, claro, los problemas se resuelven donde se tienen que resolver, en el lugar donde ocurren. Pero el asunto es que para resolver ese problema de manera maravillosa, ese problema no se resuelve con lo inmediato, sino que se resuelve con lo sistémico. Entonces, solamente en la manera en que nosotros tengamos una manera de gestionar lo público distinto, y aquí es donde yo sí creo que la Fundación Rockefeller, esta iniciativa es muy relevante, es porque nos va a permitir pensar alrededor de esa nueva manera de gestión pública. Una manera de gestión que basada en lo que he dicho desde el principio, una competencia como la resiliencia, nos permita pensar en una gestión más sistémica, donde ahí la pregunta no es si lo clave es lo local o lo global o lo nacional o lo federal. No, lo clave es que todos tenemos que sintonizarnos, porque resulta que no podemos resolver el problema en ninguna de las anteriores instancias, ni en lo local ni en lo nacional, sino de manera conjunta, para poder que verdaderamente sea proactiva y no reactiva.
Thank you very much. I think we've got time just for one quick question. Sorry, I can see many hands up. I apologise for we not having enough time for this. There's one here. Actually, maybe perhaps we'll try and take just a couple of quick questions and then we'll kind of round them all up at the end. So go on,
So my question, I'm not sure how quick it will be. When we talk about the resilience, I couldn't help but think about sustainability. So on one hand, we have a resilience that implies at one extreme stubbornness in pursuing certain goals. But learning from the history, when we know that civilizations, cities disappeared despite the resilience, I'd like to pose to the panel this question of how do you address in your cities this very difficult, politically charged, emotional question of how sustainable it is within this current environment to continue with the development of the cities?
Thank you. Why don't we just round up a few? There's a few more. There's a couple at the back there, perhaps, if I could. There's two gentlemen there. I say, yeah, take one and then the other.
Yeah, just a quick question. I think the challenges of the U.S. cities and some of the emerging market cities in Medellin and Dakar are a little bit different in the sense that those cities in emerging markets, if you will, are looking also at how do we deal with the growth that is upon us. How do we deal with the numbers of people moving into these cities and providing them with infrastructure services as well as social services? And I heard the mayor of Oakland talk about public-private partnerships. I would like to hear a little bit about how are you thinking about dealing with water and roads and ports and airports and healthcare services and so forth as you look forward 10, 20 years into those cities?
Sorry, and that's specifically with relation to growing cities, or sorry?
In more in relation to the cities like Medellin and Dakar and developing country cities.
Right, I'm with you. Thank you very much. And sorry, yeah, one just in front of them.
Well, thank you, Mayors. I really enjoyed how social issues were like a real central part of all your responses. I was just wondering, how do your city engineers respond to that? Or how difficult or easy is it to get them on board and get them to change a bit of their thinking?
Thank you. And then there were a couple, two or three, I think, down here.
Just quickly, looking down the road, we've talked about resilience and really kind of wrestling with what the definition is. And if we look at the good efforts by the Rockefeller Foundation to be a catalyst in this regard, I'd ask each of you mayors to look down the road, end of your term, and I'd be asking you, what has changed since this initial catalytic effort that makes resilience not a nice to, but a critical element, a must-do for your successors? And I think that's the inherent challenge in all of this, is really to institutionalize it. So that would be my question to you.
Thank you. That sounds like an excellent one to end on. And we had, I think, maybe just a couple more down here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Ricky Burdett, in fact, I was one of the judges, so I just wanted to make a comment and then a question. I mean, it is amazing that out of the 50-odd ones that we saw, not only has there been evidence of this vertical integration, but also horizontal integration. I mean, a lot of the questions are also dealing with this issue that, and we were very surprised positively as judges to see that where there is environmental risk, very different nature, there is also evidence of new forms of social cohesion. That's extraordinarily new. That's very, very important. Maybe very close to your question is, but is this resilience topic sexy enough to get re-elected? I mean, you know, just, are you at the next time you go, are you going to use the resilience agenda to get re-elected?
Excellent. Thank you. And then one, just one there, I think. It's going to have, sorry, just one have to be the last question.
Hello. I just have a quick question about how much is resilience like the more of a framework, and how much is it addressing the economic challenges that your city faces? Because I feel a lot of what you've been talking about is like, if your city, well, for New Orleans, since I'm from New Orleans, if the city had more resources, then a lot of the problems that it faced during Katrina and even afterwards, it wouldn't have had such a disadvantage. Like, it wouldn't have been as disastrous. And even for emerging market cities, like if you were able to get some of the economics in there, you wouldn't face some of the problems in terms of drugs and violence and where do you put youth and stuff. So.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, okay, some great questions. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible.
So if I could start. So I'm up for re-election, and public safety is my city's, even though we're the greenest city. Some people I don't care about us being green. I care that the cell phone robberies are up, which is all the big cities are dealing with right now. So, but generationally, my younger people, my millennials, the people who can't afford San Francisco are now making Oakland really the cultural art center of the whole Bay Area. They actually care about the green issues the most. When we raised parking tickets a couple of years ago, people in the hills and older white people were going to have my head. But the young people said, you should charge more. People shouldn't drive so much. They should take public transportation. We should fund our free green shuttle. So, so I think it's a generational issue, and I think young people are much more sensitive. The issue of whether it's a contradiction, you know, I was the chair of the local government commission, which runs the smart growth conferences. And the reality is the new urbanism, actually it's smarter and greener to have more density in cities. But the question again is equity. And so in the Bay Area, we had this huge fight over new funding for housing because our governor killed redevelopment. Don't ask me why. But now we're looking at how do we build affordable housing. And what we've generally decided is those cities that take more population should get more of the affordable housing funding. But on the other hand, you can't concentrate all the poor people in just those cities, that all cities must take some low-income housing. Otherwise, you create barriers. And so we're doing that dance all the time, but it is driving more resources to the city. The cities are more exciting. Areas around the cities are beginning to realize that the cities are a cultural important treasure and therefore more willing to fund more regional things. And I think that's where America is going to grow up. We're going to begin to understand ourselves as regions. We're going to understand the interests of core cities. And one of the most interesting things that's happening in Oakland is the gray tsunami of more elderly boomers who are affluent and well-educated, they're actually part of the trend of moving back into the cities. And so how do I keep my affordable housing for my poor seniors and for my young immigrants at the same time? So the struggle over housing and the balance to keep it both an exciting place and therefore an economically innovative place is, I think, the problem all of the cities are having.
Thanks very much. Mayor Sall, I wondered if I could bring you in on this question about the particular challenges of growing cities and issues of infrastructure. We talk about ports, water supplies and so on, and how you might be thinking about trying to address those.
J'ai pas entendu.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just there was the question from the gentleman over there about the particular challenges faced by cities that are growing in terms of water, port facilities, other kinds of infrastructure. How do you think about addressing those? And there was, I think, a particular issue about the role for public-private partnerships.
Merci beaucoup. Dans tous les cas, je voudrais d'abord dire à celui qui nous a demandé si le fait d'être certifié ville résiliente peut aider notre réélection.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to thank the person who asked the question whether or not being a resilient city helps you to be re-elected.
Bien sûr, ça va être une très bonne chose parce que.
I think that will be a very good thing, in fact.
Et ça va aider. Moi, je suis en élection dans 3 mois.
And it will help me. I'm running for re-election in 3 months, so that's perfect.
Donc, vous comprenez que c'est une très bonne chose. Mais
I think you'll understand that this event is very good for me.
Maintenant, par rapport à la question du modérateur,
now, in relation to the question that was asked by the moderator,
les pays émergents et les pays en développement
talking about emerging countries,
vivent beaucoup plus intensément cette urbanisation accélérée.
This accelerated growth of urbanization is felt much more vividly in those countries than they are in developed countries.
Et le problème dans ces pays, c'est que c'est les populations actives qui viennent dans les zones urbaines.
And the problem that we have in our countries, in those countries, is that it's active working population from the rural areas moving to the urban areas.
Et généralement, nous n'avons pas de plan d'urbanisme qui les avait prévus.
And generally, we don't have an urban planning policy or any plan or initiative that has anticipated such a move from rural to urban areas.
Parce que vous prévoyez par rapport à votre croix démographique de la ville.
Usually you plan in accordance to the demographic growth that is anticipated for your city.
Mais ça s'ajoute aux croix démographiques naturelles.
But this is in addition to the quote-unquote natural demographic growth of the city.
Donc on a un vrai problème d'infrastructure.
And therefore it leads to real issues of infrastructures.
Et quand je vous ai parlé d'inondation, c'est pas comme chez lui, hein.
And when I've talked about floodings, of course, it's nothing in comparison to New Orleans, but
la région du Cap-Vert est une presqu'île.
But we have the Cape Verde, for example, the Cape Verde area, which is a
quand on a 100 mm d'eau, on a eu de l'inondation parce que les gens sont venus habiter dans des zones non édificandées où il y avait des lacs et des fleuves.
And when we have 100 millimeters of rain, it's flooding. You have people moving in areas where there were lakes, where there was water, and that are easily flooding when there is a lot of rain.
C'est-à-dire qu'ils vous créent de vraies slams.
And they create real
bidonvilles.
They're real poor cities and very poor neighbors that developed in these areas due to that migration of population.
Donc, celui qui nous demande que font les ingénieurs là-dedans, ils sont interpellés dans leur capacité à anticiper ces phénomènes.
And when we are being asked, what are your engineers doing about it? They are working and thinking about anticipating, about preparedness mostly.
Thank you. Yeah, Landrieu, I wanted to ask you about your city engineers. What are they doing?
I'll respond the same way that the mayor did. I hope so. About education.
Yeah.
And to the engineers question, has anybody ever tried to change a civil engineer's mind? But in reality, it can be done because the engineers will build to the vision. And so we have engineers now, if we say, look, just on a road, what kind of material did you used to use to build the road? Was it concrete or was it asphalt? Was it permeable? In other words, could water go through it? And now they're building permeable roads, and they're finding new sustainable ways of doing it. And so once you have ignited the imagination of the engineer, they become entrepreneurial as well. But again, they'll build to the vision. But as the mayor said just a minute ago, and I want to really highlight this point, he talks about something, a natural disaster, a water, or something forcing people to move from where they are to another place where they will stay. Now in New Orleans, for example, again, we had 500,000 homes that got hurt, 250,000 that got destroyed. But in many of those instances, the people who lived in those homes that got destroyed before the storm had education, had money, had a job, and as a consequence had insurance. So they had financial resources to build back where it was okay for them to live. We didn't have the same problem that you have where people moved into a place and crowded. We had the exact opposite. They couldn't stay, those that didn't have insurance or financial money, so they had to go to other places. So New Orleans had the exact opposite problem culturally that the mayor had, was that all of our people went to Houston and to Atlanta, and we now have a diaspora that we never had before, and we want our people back. And so the challenge that we have is how do we bring everybody back in a way that is better than how it is that they left. I would simply say this. The reason I'm so optimistic and I'm so hopeful about this particular initiative, Judith, and I thank you for it, is because the one thing that history has taught us is that human beings by nature are resilient. We are survivors. We have survived for billions of years, and we will continue to survive, and we're adaptable. But from time to time, there are moments in history when we go to sleep and are not aware of dangers. And I think that one of the things that the 21st century has taught us collectively is that there is a lot of danger that we have gone to sleep on and haven't thought about. And so as we start thinking about resilience and how to live in a different way, we will absolutely learn from each other, because just from sitting on this panel today, there are things that are happening in Medellin that are directly related to what's happening on the streets of New Orleans. Violence is one of them. Tremendous challenges in Medellin, Colombia about drugs, the creation of drugs and the exportation of drugs. Tremendous challenges in New Orleans about the receipt and use. The federal government of the United States of America sent $2 billion to the country of Colombia to help train police forces to stop the exportation of drugs that actually come to the city of New Orleans that are used. But the federal government in the United States of America did not give money to the local police departments in New Orleans. So it wasn't a full circle. So I've kind of encouraged the federal government to think about Operation Full Circle. If, in fact, violence is a problem and it's being generated, let's say, for example, in this instance, by drug creation or drug use, that if you invest in one place, you have to invest in others. You can't say, it doesn't make any sense for the United States government to say, well, it's a federal priority in Medellin, right, but it's not a federal priority on the streets of America. If somebody smart was designing that, and they wanted to have a comprehensive approach, both vertical and horizontal integration across the water, right, then Medellin and New Orleans would actually be a partner in this violence reduction thing, and the federal government of the United States of America, instead of just investing in one place, would be investing in both, and she and I would be solving problems in our cities that are the identical problem and affecting our constituents in the same way. So there is an example of a breach in thought, a breach in strategy, and a disconnect in terms of what is federally financed and what is locally run. We have the same thing in Dakar, Senegal, same exact issue, and our cities have a great history together. And of course, Mayor Quan has already talked about the unique things that are happening in Oakland that actually are not so unique because they're happening on the streets of New Orleans, which is why the issues that we're talking about need the facilitation, Judith, that you guys have put together here, where we can link together, right, the knowledge and the people, and then we can leverage all of our assets, not only to create intellectual capital, but find the resources necessary to get it done. And I think it's just a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and I look forward to taking advantage of it.
But I'm sure you wouldn't want to go without answering the question from your constituent. Do questions of resilience ultimately boil down to questions of economics?
Absolutely. And the reason is that General Honore, who was from Louisiana but helped us get back on his feet, said this very simple thing. When it gets cold, the poor get colder. When it gets hot, the poor get hotter. If a storm comes and someone doesn't have the economic ability to evacuate, or somebody hasn't had the financial wherewithal to build a strong house, or had the ability to buy insurance, their capacity to help themselves stand back up is diminished, which means that the burden then falls on those who do have. Now, in a city like New Orleans, and this is what shocked the nation, when the United States of America saw 25,000 United States citizens standing helpless on the doorsteps of the Superdome, right, the nation gasped and said, wow, that doesn't look like us, because we didn't understand the level and the depth of poverty. And then how did we as a nation, the strongest nation in the world, not be able to respond more quickly? That told ourselves something about it. But had those individuals, right, been more economically, secure, had other things that other people had, and had been more personally and physically and economically stronger, and would have been able to evacuate on their own, then we wouldn't have had to come in and do that. And so essentially this gets down to the individual and the strength of the person, the educational capacity, the economic ability to stand up on their own 2 feet, and the ability to be singularly resourceful, right, in a way that doesn't require other people to help. And so when you get down to it, it goes globally, but at the end of the day, it ends up at one house relating to one person and the ability for them to be strong and to take care of themselves and their family. Now, the issue is going to be tougher, the how-to. So the mayor here said it exactly right. Think globally, but live locally, and figure out a way to make both of those things happen. I think that's going to be the great challenge of what a resilient city looks like at the end of the day.
Thanks very much indeed. And Vice Mayor Restrepo, final thought from you. Will resilience help you to get re-elected?
La voy a poner al revés. En el caso nuestro no podemos, no hay reelección de alcaldes en nuestro país. Sí lo hay de presidente, más no de alcaldes. Pero las sociedades resilientes sí ayudan a que haya sostenibilidad en las elecciones. En el caso de Medellín, nosotros llevamos 3 gobiernos que, como no podemos ser reelegidos, son gobiernos de 4 años. Para nosotros es más complejo porque son personas distintas que tenemos que compartir programáticamente la solución de la ciudad. ¿Y quién garantiza eso? El único que lo garantiza es el votante. Solo cuando la ciudad efectivamente adquiere como sociedad una comprensión de que los problemas se resuelven en largo plazo, que tienen que ser sostenibles, que políticas de educación y de transformación no se hacen en 4 años, que hoy nosotros llevamos 3 gobiernos, 2 de la misma línea y este tercero es de una línea política distinta, pero los 3 compartiendo desarrollo programático. ¿En función de qué? En función de lo que la ciudad está exigiendo. Y es que esa ciudad que ha aprendido de alguna manera a resolver sus problemas, ha aprendido que no tiene la oportunidad de reelegir al gobernante, porque la ley no lo permite, pero tiene que elegir un programa que en ningún caso vaya a terminar con lo que hizo el gobierno anterior. Entonces se las pongo todavía más difícil, y es que no se trata de si esto le va a ayudar al alcalde a que lo reelijan. Lo que le va a ayudar a la ciudad es a elegir el programa que le dé continuidad, que idealmente, claro, entiendo, los alcaldes será el que ellos lideran. En nuestro caso, como nos desprendemos de esa posibilidad de estar haciendo campaña para continuar en el gobierno, casi que la campaña nuestra es que el ciudadano elija el programa que le permita continuidad a la ciudad. Y ese, digamos que hoy es uno de los mayores éxitos que tiene la ciudad de Medellín, porque uno de los grandes éxitos dentro del país es que llevamos ya 10 años, o sea, ajustar 12 años con en el 2015, de gobiernos distintos, con propuestas políticas distintas y como digo, este último viene de una mirada política completamente distinta, de un partido político distinto, pero 3 gobiernos que tienen continuidad y que quien está obligando esa continuidad es la ciudad. Entonces, yo lo pongo al revés en la medida en que digo, solo una sociedad y una ciudad resiliente se pone en la reflexión en aprender, porque además hemos aprendido porque hemos tenido malos gobiernos. Entonces, hemos aprendido que los malos gobiernos producen eso, entonces ese aprendizaje ha hecho que como ciudadanos hayamos elegido la continuidad dentro de nuestra imposibilidad normativa, y es que no la podemos elegir en cabeza de la misma persona, la tenemos que elegir en cabeza de proyectos distintos. Y el ejemplo es de tal magnitud que yo he trabajado en los últimos 3 gobiernos con alcaldes distintos de los 3 gobiernos y de tendencias, de miradas políticas distintas, porque la política de cultura y de educación persiste en el tiempo. Entonces, creo que sí es una oportunidad, colocándola, como digo, al revés. Cómo una ciudad resiliente puede garantizar continuidad programática, ideal si es en cabeza de la misma persona, pero si no lo puede ser en cabeza de los diferentes programas. Y quisiera decir algo sobre lo de las ciudades emergentes, y es, yo creo que hay una palabra que no hemos usado, que finalmente emergente o no emergente, desarrollado o no desarrollado, la tenemos todas las ciudades en común. Se llama la inequidad, y esa la tenemos porque ese es el mal que tenemos todos. Y en esa inequidad radica que por más desarrollado, por más emergente que seas, cuando las catástrofes ocurren, o cuando cuando el sistema de riesgo se ve confrontado, lo primero que sale a relucir en una ciudad es la inequidad. ¿Por qué? Porque lo primero que sale es la vulnerabilidad que no pudiste controlar en el mismo sistema. O sea, Medellín es hoy la ciudad con el mayor índice de ingresos del país y la ciudad con las poblaciones con los índices más bajos de ingreso en el país, porque tenemos el mismo comportamiento de la mayoría de las ciudades desarrolladas, y es el comportamiento de la inequidad en la manera como crecemos. Crecemos, somos fuertes económicamente, somos de la ciudad con mayor potencia económica dentro del país, con el mayor desarrollo empresarial del país, pero también con las comunidades más vulnerables. Y el gran reto, que había una palabra que me gustó mucho ahorita en la pregunta inicial, que era la sostenibilidad, es que mientras no logremos en el marco de lo social, o sea, hablando de la sostenibilidad social, logremos romper ese elemento, esa inequidad siempre seguirá siendo para nosotros el punto neurálgico para lograr que verdaderamente las ciudades tengan capacidad de recuperarse frente a la solución de sus problemas, porque siempre, recuerden que la cadena siempre va a caminar a la velocidad de su eslabón más débil, y ese finalmente debe ser la tarea de todos nosotros como gobernantes, lograr que ese eslabón que se hace el más débil por la inequidad sea justamente el que más debamos fortalecer.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's a fascinating issue about which we could no doubt talk for a great deal longer. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Maybe we'll get a chance to discuss that further over lunch. I think we're now breaking for lunch. I've certainly found it absolutely fascinating, revelatory debate. I hope you've all found it as interesting and informative as I have. As I think now we're going to wrap up for the break. I'm just going to say thank you very much indeed to Michael Berkowitz, Mayor Quan, Mayor Sall, Mayor Landrieu, Vice Mayor Restrepo. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.